Valygar watched the Eldar squad approaching, the light rain beating on his scope lens and distorting the view. The alien rune on their foreheads marked them out as members of the most ancient of the martial paths an Eldar could take. Aspect was the Gothic translation he had found. Some among his brothers scoffed at distinguishing between various alien warrior types, but Valygar knew better. He gleaned as much as he could of Xenos tactics and orders of battle, knowing that eventually any small piece of knowledge could serve him well. He adjusted the dope on his rifle with a blink of his eye, keeping the barrel trained on the approaching figures. An alert came down not long ago over the Vox that stragglers were coming their way. Not directly, of course. Their radio silence had been absolute since insertion. A prearranged series of Vox clicks, sounding like random static or interference to any eavesdroppers, had activated his unit. Their fellow Tears had paid for their trouble in pursuing the Xenos, losing 4 battle brothers while only a single enemy was killed. This was why he and his stealth team were here. He doubted anyone in their company could track the Eldar through this jungle for long. He hoped the other similar units, scattered along the likely lines of Eldar exfiltration, were so fortunate. The Eldar warriors slid through the trees and seemed to somehow be avoiding the raindrops. It was difficult enough to stay with the lithe aliens when they weren't trying to be stealthy. The way they moved disturbed him, not least because their form was so similar to humanity's. He counted at least 5 and perhaps as many as 7 of them. It was hard to be sure with how they melded with the shadows and glided around the undergrowth. His saving grace was that they had a casualty. It looked like one of Lieutenant Corrin's men had scored a glancing blow on its leg, slowing the group enough for Valygar to track them. He smiled and promised himself that he would thank the Eye of the Angel for not training his men to shoot better. His squad had been hunkered down in their hides for 3 days while the main engagement was taking place, waiting for this opportunity. The Eldar thought their avenues of retreat were clear, and, Emperor and the Angel willing, they believed it still. Valygar stepped in to witness Sarevok's personal sparring chamber. The Tears' 3rd Company kept the temperature aboard their battle barge, the Echo of Blood, rather cool, but the air in this room was frigid today, and he felt his physiology move to compensate. The captain kept an elaborate routine based on ancient methods of hardening the mind and body. In his view, the Emperor had given the Astartes the tools with which to become great, but it was up to them to realize that potential. Valygar didn't disagree, of course, but he had never seen anyone take it quite so far as the witness. He swept his gaze across the facility. It was spacious for a sparring chamber, or at least it would have been if a third of its area wasn't taken up by the large generators along the east wall that were needed to control the climate. Sarevok had consulted with their cousins in the Imperial Fists and Salamanders, discovering the precise depths and heights of the temperatures on their respective homeworlds of Inuit and Nocturne, as he sought to know exactly how to fight and win in extremes.
"Brother, come in,"
a voice boomed over the hum of the generators from across the room. Sarevok stood from where he had been kneeling, no doubt offering his benedictions to the Emperor and the Angel. He was an imposing figure in and out of armor, his short yellow mohawk standing out against his dark skin. They had a similar complexion, hailing from worlds sectors apart but sharing hot, equatorial climates, though Valygar's hair was black and close-cropped.
"You wanted to see me, witness,"
Valygar said, unsure of the nature of this summons. He was a sergeant but counted himself amongst the rank and file. Though he had earned some renown lately as part of a reconnaissance team, he had not thought it warranted special consideration from the company captain himself. The 3rd Company's tactical leader did not waste any time with pleasantries.
"Your actions on Galmath 3 did not go unnoticed by myself and the Soul Warden. Ambushing and slaying Eldar is not an easy feat. Many of our brothers sent their souls to Sanguinius in that affair."
Valygar bowed slightly in appreciation of the compliment, but said,
"As stated in the report, witness, they were injured and running. The spear and Eye of the Angel made our work easier."
Sarevok smiled and turned away, running his hand along a practice blade, one that was balanced and weighted to mimic a power sword.
"Indeed, Edelman and Corrin are thorough, but we both know that the Xenos, especially the Eldar, are never easy prey. I watched the entire operation from your Helm's video feed recording."
This took the sergeant aback. It was uncommon for a warrior like the witness to personally observe a fellow Marine in battle, especially one that was away from the main engagement.
I am honored, witness, that you thought our actions worthy of your personal attention.
Sarevok turned his gaze away from the practice blade and fixed Valygar in place with his red-hued eyes.
All things that will bring the angel back are worth my attention.
Without waiting for a reply, he picked up the practice blade and said,
Choose a weapon.
What they were doing was unprecedented. Catching Eldar off guard was not something even Astartes could pull off reliably, and Valygar felt exhilaration at the challenge. His orders had come directly from Witness Sarevok, which really meant they were from the Soul Warden. Where and how the intelligence had been gathered to choose the ambush sites was a mystery. Visions of prophecy were rare amongst the ranks of the Soul Wardens, but not unheard of. And there were those 2 vessels that recently joined the fleet, unmarked and unlooked for. No one Valygar knew had anything to say about those aboard, except that the decks of the Echo of Blood were cleared at strange times, and security footage disabled wherever the visitors went. He was set up atop a low, wide rock formation jutting up from the jungle floor, sprawled on his stomach and covered in vines and woodland debris. He had been so still over the course of the vigil that a local avian-like creature had made a nest somewhere on his back, a perfect capstone to his hive. Without taking his attention from the scope of his sniper rifle, Valygar tapped Brother Algar twice with the toe of his boot, the most movement he dared make with the quarry so close. His fellow Marine was posted just below and to the left of Valygar on a small outcropping. The nudge prompted Elgar to risk a short burst transmission to their third, Brother Shengrin, holed up approximately 100 meters north and west of their position. 4 seconds ticked by as Valygar waited impatiently, finally feeling 3 subtle vibrations as Elgar tapped a ceramite fist, muffled by grasses and moss, against the stone beneath him. 3. Shengrin had no visual contact. He had to act. The Eldar were almost to the kill zone, and the timing needed to be perfect. Valygar did not fear the Xenos and relished the thought of joining a piece of his soul to Sanguinius, but not here in this jungle. Ambush was his stock and trade, and he meant to end these creatures and remind them that humanity had teeth. He did not wish to invite hand-to-hand combat, however, in this dense foliage, where the Eldar could strike and fade into the shadows, picking the Astartes apart. He made his decision. His boot tapped Elgar on the shoulder once, and the other Marine tensed. Valygar aimed at the Eldar whose forms appeared clearest to him and pulled the trigger, followed almost immediately by 2 other silenced whumps. As expected, they hit nothing but air. Valygar felt his body flood with battle stimulants at those words, hiding his surprise by searching the myriad weapons racks surrounding the fighting ring. It didn't take long to locate what he wanted. 2 short swords, daggers really, each about a foot long and modeled after the Astartes' standard-issue combat blades. He was a warrior of extremes, preferring a long-range rifle for distance work and the shortest blades for close-in. He avoided the middle distance, the strange no-man's land where most of his brothers fought with bolter, plasma, and melta. His philosophy of war revolved around the shadows, taking pride in eliminating a foe before they knew he was there. But he was a son of Sanguinius as well, and craved the intimacy of close combat as much as any. As soon as he stepped into the ring, Sarevok advanced, his sword sweeping up from a low guard in an attempt to disembowel him. The blades were real enough, though the sword was unpowered and the combat knives did not have their monomolecular edges, and with an Astartes' strength, could easily cause grievous wounds. Valygar deflected the blow and sidestepped, ducking under the reverse cut that the witness aimed at his head. Valygar had never fought a warrior like Sarevok before, and was determined to show his worth.
Garrick is leaving the company,
said Sarevok, parrying a knife thrust Valygar aimed at his gut and spinning out of the way.
We will need a new Shadow of the Angel soon.
This statement rocked Valygar back on his heels as much as Sarevok's renewed assault did. The witness came at him in a flurry of steel, showing Valygar that the stories about him in battle were not only true, but possibly understated. He took several glancing blows on his arms and legs that drew thin lines of blood, none bit deep enough to end the duel, but he was hard-pressed to hold off the captain, and the edge of the ring was nearly at his back.
What does this have to do with me?
He gasped between parries, the icy air slicing into his lungs. Sarevok's eyes flashed bright red. A trick of the light, thought Valygar. Sarevok responded.
I thought you might take his place.
As Sarevok said this, he stepped back, his jaw tightening and that odd glint still in his eyes, for some reason giving Valygar room to breathe. He seemed to struggle to get the words out as he said,
I am impressed with your work.
Valygar didn't hesitate, feeling the surge of energy that all successors of the Ninth did in melee combat.
I would accept,
He said, and advanced forward with combat blades raised. Sarevok met him in the center of the ring, his single blade somehow everywhere at once to block Valygar's short cuts and jabs. He seemed to have recovered his voice.
The Proving Ground has need of your talents.
Sarevok said as he forced Valygar back with a shove.
I need a Shadow Commander worthy of the name to replace Garrick.
Valygar stepped forward, continuing his swift, short attacks, seeking to slip the knife past the larger blade and score a decisive blow.
Garrick is skilled, but not one with the shadows.
The witness's answer was to counterattack, notching his sword edge as Valygar caught the overhead chop between crossed daggers.
I will need more than words from you,
He said, as Valygar aimed a double slash at his throat. Sarevok sidestepped and launched a straight thrust at Valygar's chest. He caught the blade between his arm and torso, pinning it. Sarevok grunted as Valygar pulled him close, ready to deliver a match-ending thrust. To his surprise, Sarevok didn't resist. In fact, he accelerated into Valygar and delivered a jarring headbutt, cracking his teeth and sending the sergeant sprawling back. He heard the sword clang to the hard stone floor. Dazed but recovering, he jumped into a defensive stance, expecting to accept a charge. Instead, he saw the witness on one knee looking at the floor. One arm was resting on his leg, and the other was on the deck propping him up. At that moment, Sarevok looked up at him, his eyes glowing red, and blood from Valygar's broken mouth already frozen over his lips. There was no trick of the light now. Then he said something Valygar never thought he would hear directed at him.
Traitor.
And he charged. The reports of the rifles were muffled, but may as well have been ancient powdered cannon fire as far as the honed senses on both sides of the battlefield were concerned. The Eldar immediately fanned out, jinking and moving in near random patterns, trusting in their agility and not wanting a stray shot to hit a comrade. This was where the chess match truly began for Valygar. He knew the warriors of the first aspect were possibly the proudest of a proud race. He also knew that despite their distaste, they were learned in Space Marine tactics and dispositions. The Monkey were beastly as far as the Eldar were concerned, but the former outnumbered the latter so badly that they needed every advantage possible just to survive. They knew the sound of bolt sniper rifle discharges, and that squads armed with these usually operated in threes. Valygar kept looking down his scope, firing as quickly as he could eject and load shells, allowing himself a slight smile upon hearing Elgar firing both his own and Shengren's rifles beside him. His battle brother had strapped them to his arms in such a way that they stayed stable and allowed him to reload without needing to stow either weapon. This setup made his aim terrible, but Valygar counted on the Eldar expecting to not be hit in this weather and terrain. As the alien warriors entered their kill zone, Elgar spoke aloud for the first time in 3 days, his voice rasping with lack of use.
Shengren has a visual.
The first set of camouflage mines detonated under the leading Eldar, sending limbs and a long curved helm flying through the air. Several small trees crashed to the forest floor as well. Valygar finally managed to hit one of the Xenos as it stumbled from the blast, cutting it clean in half with the explosive round. The remaining Eldar kept coming, accelerating to close the distance right into the second wave of mines. The buried charges exploded under them, creating the same effect as before. Fires kindled by the blast lasted only for a handful of seconds as the rain and humidity stamped them out, as well as any emergency suppression system. The smoke hung for a few moments in the windless drizzle, and then the jungle was silent. Valygar dared hope that they'd gotten them all. Sarevok's speed was incredible. Valygar had no chance to dodge and braced himself for the blow. The witness barreled into him and pinned him to the ground. Valygar grabbed at his arms, trying to overbalance and flip Sarevok off of him. The rage had him. How had this not been seen? Where was the Soul Warden? Sarevok was beyond him now, though, his eyes a fiery red and his face twisted in hatred. He forced Valygar's arms apart into the ground, howling at him what Sanguinius must have seen in his last moments.
Traitor! Brother! Why?
The skin of Valygar's forearms began to burn and freeze as they hit the frigid stone. Sarevok was far too strong. The sergeant was no stranger to the Death Company, and he knew what they could do. He struggled, he knew, in vain, but Astartes did not willingly submit to anything. As Sarevok continued to scream out Sanguinius' last memories, Valygar saw the witness's head move towards his neck. He was going to bite out his throat. Valygar shouted with his own anger and wished to fall to the rage himself and force Sarevok back, if only to end this and die in armor painted black, rather than here at the hands of his captain. There was a crash, and Valygar saw the door of the sparring chamber fly over Sarevok's shoulder, even as he smelled his own blood on the witness's breath. Somehow the air chilled even further, and Valygar heard a voice say, "No." Sarevok froze in place, his teeth already clamped on Valygar's throat. He sat motionless for a full minute, scanning the trees and guttering motes of flame. Nothing. Elgar had unlimbered Shengrin's rifle and was peering through his scope as well. Valygar blink-clicked the Vox channel to the echo of blood open for the first time since beddown, preparing to send a report and move out for exfil. It was the bird that saved him. The hapless creature had hunkered down in its nest during the commotion. Only now did it decide to squawk. Valygar spun onto his back and felt the earth vibrate and come apart where his twin hearts had just been. An Eldar stood above him, already withdrawing the powered blade and preparing another strike. The plumed helm was cracked and his wine-dark armor blackened from the ambush. He was missing the bottom half of his left arm, somehow managing to work his way around the two Marines despite the injury. Valygar was impressed despite himself. Elgar reacted quickly by pulling his bolt pistol and firing, missing wide as the aspect warrior flipped backwards and landed behind a thick-trunked tree. Pieces blasted onto the side as Elgar continued to fire, tracking the Eldar's last known trajectory. Valygar used the cover of his fellow Marine's fusillade to drop his rifle and draw his two combat blades, charging in pursuit through the shower of smoke and soggy wood chips. He rounded the tree and stopped. The Eldar was gone. He felt the hairs on the back of his neck rise and instinctively thrust both blades straight above him. There was a clang as the Eldar's sword deflected from its intended path, jamming down and through his collarbone and out from the soft armor near his hip instead of straight down and into his vital organs. The combat blades had bit true, however. The Eldar died even as it crashed into Valygar, losing its grip on its weapons and toppling to the ground. Elgar put two bolts into its head and scanned the area for further hostiles. Valygar leaned against the tree, gritted his teeth, and slowly withdrew the razor-edged blade straight up from his body. He started to bleed, but would rather let his Emperor-forged coagulants do their jobs than risk further injury by leaving it in. Moments later, Shengrin appeared. He took his rifle back from Elgar, and they moved out. Valygar led the way as they patrolled to both ambush sites, his pain suppressants keeping away the worst effects of the wound. The edge of the alien blade had made such a fine cut that he was forced to use the battlefield patch kit en route, sealing the wound with foam to stop the bleeding and allow the internal healing to begin. When they reached the kill zone, he saw that the frag mines had done their work. 2 bodies at the furthest site, 2 at the nearest, plus 1 at the hide made 5. That matched his estimated range of their numbers, and he was confident the mission had been a success. The Eldar had been taught a lesson today. Valygar took satisfaction in knowing that they had died before they could pass their blood-won wisdom on. Valygar did not speak, as the apothecary did his work and left. The bite on his neck had penetrated deep, but they had been able to save him. Before long, he heard heavy footfalls outside the entrance of the Medicae, and turned to see Soul Warden Tysantus in his Terminator plate enter the room.
How are you, brother?
Valygar ran his fingers over the bite marks and stared up at the librarian.
Why did he fall? Where were you?
Valygar could barely believe those words had come from his mouth. Speaking to a Soul Warden like that was not against any law, but it just wasn't done. But then again, Soul Wardens were not supposed to err like this. He realized that he was angry, furious in fact. Tears of Baal fell in battle for the glory of the Angel, not slaughtering each other in the practice chambers like animals. He refused to believe that he and his kin were nothing but time bombs, waiting to destroy what they had fought to build and defend. Tysantus nodded gravely, and with his voice barely above a whisper, said,
I should have been there sooner. Days ago, in fact. I know not why Sarevok's impending fall remained hidden from me.
You have my word that I and my fellow soul wardens will investigate it. No son of the angel deserves such a fate as both of you almost suffered. Valygar turned away, still enraged inside and forcibly cutting off the flow of battle stimulants into his body. However, he knew that nothing else could be said at this stage. The flaw and its detection were considered outside his purview. The soul wardens would not respond well to interference from those outside their ranks.
Where is the witness now?
Tycentus replied, "He is no longer the witness. Guardian Keldorn has pacified Saravak and inducted him into the Death Company. I have nominated him as the Slayer for our next engagement. He will be a terror for our enemies." Valygar knew this was accurate. He had seen the unbridled fury for himself. Tycentus continued, "He told me about his decision to appoint you to the rank of Shadow of the Angel. I concurred with him." Valygar sat up and spoke as he removed the tubes of nutrients and blood stabilizers from the armor input sockets embedded in his flesh.
You sound as if you have reconsidered, Soul Warden.
"Hardly," said Tycentus, already walking towards the exit. When he reached the door, he turned back to regard the former sergeant. "There will be a full ceremony later, and usually there is further testing, but I think the events of today and your deeds on Galmath will suffice for your trial. Have your shoulder armor sent to the serfs for repainting, then meet me in the Strategium with the other officers in 3 hours. We have a war to prosecute, Shadow of the Angel Valygar." As the sound of his footfalls receded and even the echo of them disappeared, Valygar was still looking down at his hands. They were sprinkled with the blood from his encounter. The apothecary had neglected to wash them. He was honored and pleased, of course, to be raised to this level of command, but something bit into him that he found most unsettling. For the first time in his life, Valygar of the Tears of Baal felt doubt. If this could happen once, it could happen again. It seemed that the soul wardens could not see into the souls of the chapter as clearly as was believed. Valygar stood and moved out of the facility, navigating the spacious main arterial routes of the battle barge towards his arming chamber. His thoughts were racing, but by the time he completed the journey to his rooms, he had made a decision. His purview or not, he vowed to add his own eyes to the vigil against the flaw.